the lampstand had to burn continuously. Aaron was in charge of it, and the other priests too, I don't remember.
The other priests could do that work. It was Aaron who was on the hook for making sure it got done, but the other priests were allowed to deal with the lamps. Yeah. What else?
The consequences of being a blasphemer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What else?
Making the 12 loaves of bread for the...
Right. So in the holy place, you have the lampstand on one side, the bread on the other. Why does that matter? What's important about that?
The light shone on the bread.
Yes. And why does that matter?
So it means the Lord's face is continually upon him. They gave him the blessing in Numbers 6.
That's right. So you get in the holy place, you get this little picture, this symbolism of the relationship between the Lord and his people, that the light of the Lord's face is shining on his people. Because you remember how many loaves there were? 12, because it's representative of the people. So in the holy place, you get this picture of the covenant relationship between God and his people. And then you get to the episode of with the blasphemer, which is the opposite of being in covenant relationship with the Lord. The opposite is to be forced out, to reject having his name on you, which is another way of saying that you're rejecting being part of his people, part of his family. And the consequence of rejecting his name is that you get cut off. You get forced out of the people of God. And if you're outside of the people of God, what is left for you? Nothing, right? Destruction. I mean, that's if you're cut off from the people of God, the only thing left is destruction. So you get in the 2 halves of that chapter this picture of what it means to belong to God or not. And in one case, you get life and light and all the things that are good because you're in relationship with the living God, and the other is chaos, darkness, and destruction because you reject his name. Okay, now we talked about how all of that's set in the middle of 2 chapters that talk about Sabbath times or holy times. Why interrupt all of that, the stuff about Sabbath times, with this picture in chapter 24? Because the whole purpose of instituting those Sabbath times is for the people of God to stop and remember what they have because they belong to the Lord. To stop and bask in all the blessings that come to them because they are in covenant relationship with the Lord. So the Sabbath times are not just to take a day off. That's nice, but that's not the ultimate point. The ultimate point is to reflect on your relationship with the Lord, the grace and the mercy that he's poured out, and then all the privileges that you have because you belong to him. Okay, now that idea with the Sabbath times is going to continue on today. Redemption is going to be a major theme of this chapter. So we're going to talk about Sabbath times again, but redemption is going to show up in a big way today and then again in chapter 27. So 14 times in this chapter we're going to get the word redeem or redemption because it's really important. Right here we're going to have highlighted for us the blessings that come from embracing the covenant with the Lord. Redemption is a huge part of that. And yeah, so let's look at it. Anything else you want to add before we go on? Okay, so let's look at chapter 25. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from each man whose heart..." Wait, that's Exodus. I should have just kept going and waited until somebody was like, "Wait, what?"
What version are you reading?
Yeah, that's the New Sally International. Okay, let's try this again. The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your seed, your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a Sabbath of rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, for your manservant and maidservant, and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you, as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. Count off 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbaths of years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet throughout the land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each one of you is to return to his family property, and each to his own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines, for it is a jubilee, and it is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of jubilee, everyone is to return to his own property. If you sell land to one of your countrymen or buy any from him, do not take advantage of each other. You are to buy from your countryman on the basis of the number of years since the jubilee, and he is to sell to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price, and when the years are few, you are to decrease the price, because what he is really selling you is the number of crops. Do not take advantage of each other, but fear your God. I am the Lord your God. Follow my decrees and be careful to obey my laws, and you will live safely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and live there in safety. You may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not plant or harvest our crops? I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you are but aliens and my tenants. Throughout the country that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. If one of your countrymen becomes poor and sells some of his property, his nearest relative is to come and redeem what his countryman has sold. If, however, a man has no one to redeem it for him, but he himself prospers and acquires sufficient means to redeem it, he is to determine the value for the years since he sold it and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it. He can then go back to his own property. But if he does not acquire the means to repay him, what he sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. It will be returned in the Jubilee, and he can then go back to his property. If a man sells a house in a walled city, he retains the right of redemption a full year after its sale. During that time, he may redeem it. If it is not redeemed before a full year has passed, the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to the buyer and his descendants. It is not to be returned in the Jubilee. But houses in villages without walls around them are to be considered as open country. They can be redeemed, and they are to be returned in the Jubilee. The Levites always have the right to redeem their houses in the Levitical towns which they possess. So the property of the Levites is redeemable. That is, a house sold in any town they hold, and is to be returned in the Jubilee, because the houses in the towns of the Levites are their property among the Israelites. But the pasture land belonging to their towns must not be sold. It is their permanent possession. If one of your countrymen becomes poor and is unable to support himself among you, help him as you would an alien or a temporary resident, so he can continue to live among you. Do not take interest of any kind from him, but fear your God, so that your countrymen may continue to live among you. You must not lend him money at interest or sell him food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. If one of your countrymen becomes poor among you and sells himself to you, do not make him work as a slave. He is to be treated as a hired worker or a temporary resident among you. He is to work for you until the year of Jubilee. Then he and his children are to be released, and he will go back to his own clan and to the property of his forefathers. Because the Israelites are my servants, whom I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold as slaves. Do not rule over them ruthlessly, but fear your God. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property, and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. If an alien or a temporary resident among you becomes rich, and one of your countrymen becomes poor and sells himself to the alien living among you, or to a member of the alien's clan, he retains the right of redemption after he has sold himself. One of his relatives may redeem him. An uncle or a cousin or any blood relative in his clan may redeem him. Or if he prospers, he may redeem himself. He and his buyer are to count the time from the year he sold himself up to the year of Jubilee. The price for his release is to be based on the rate paid to a hired man for that number of years. If many years remain, he must pay for his redemption a larger share of the price paid for him. If only a few years remain until the year of Jubilee, he is to compute that and pay for his redemption accordingly. He is to be treated as a man hired from year to year. You must see to it that his owner does not rule over him ruthlessly. Even if he is not redeemed in any of these ways, he and his children are to be released in the year of Jubilee. For the Israelites belong to me as servants. They are my servants whom I brought out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Okay, so how does the chapter start in verses 1 and 2?
The Lord said to Moses, to tell the people they must observe the Sabbath to the Lord.
Mm-hmm. And right here it specifically says the land must observe a Sabbath. That's interesting. But you're right, it's the people who give the land the Sabbath rest. So, remember how the sign, we talked about this last week, the Sabbath rest is a sign of the covenant between the Lord and his people, that he's their liberator, he's their protector, he's their provider. It's a time to celebrate the privilege of belonging to him, and his people need these regular reminders because they have really short memories. And by they, I mean we, right? How long does it take for you to forget that God is your provider?
A tenth of a second.
That's right. It doesn't take long at all. And so God has commanded these days of rest, of Sabbath rest, in order for the people to stop and remember who is it who actually provides for them. It's the Lord. Okay, so we get a little reminder right here in verse 1. The Israelites are still at Sinai, the place where the Lord and the people enter into covenant together. But these instructions are looking ahead to the time when they finally settle in the land of Canaan. When they take possession of the land, they have to remember that the land does not ultimately belong to them. It belongs to the Lord, and they have to treat it the way he requires. They're not to abuse his creation, and they're not to worship it. They're to respect it, and by doing that, to respect and trust him. They're tenants, but he's the owner. So the Lord requires that the land be given a Sabbath rest to him. Now, what does that mean? Well, he goes on to explain it. So what are the instructions that he gives for a Sabbath year in verses 3 to 7?
They're supposed to sow their fields for 6 years and trim their vineyards and gather their crops. So they're supposed to take care of the land for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the 7th year, they're supposed to take a break for it. They're supposed to give the land rest.
Right. So they can do all their farming like usual for 6 years, but the 7th year, they cease from all of that. And you notice verse 4 calls it a Sabbath to the Lord. I think there's a reminder here that the main purpose of doing this isn't because leaving the land to lie fallow for a year is a good farming practice, although it is. It is a good farming practice. But the main purpose of this is to remind the people that the land is the Lord's. It belongs to them. They're tenants, he's the owner, and beyond that, the Lord is not a slave master over his creation. He doesn't abuse or exploit his creation. He's a God who provides rest for his creation, not just for people, but rest for animals and rest for the land too. So ultimately, this year of rest is about recognizing who the Lord is and trusting him for what they need. Okay, now, on that note of trusting him, what do the people eat during that year if they don't do any planting or harvesting?
They go out to the garden and get what they need for the meal.
That's right. You just go out, you get whatever you need to eat, you eat it, and then you just keep doing that for the year. So they're not to go out and plant and reap like they normally would to store it or to sell it, but they can go out to the fields and vineyards and take whatever food they need to eat. And not just them, but did you notice it mentions too their servants, their employees, the foreigners who live there, as well as the livestock and the wild animals. So whatever the land produces can be eaten when it's needed by whoever needs it. And if that's the case, it's not just the land that rests, but it's the people and the animals too. Now, the text doesn't make it clear if this is a national Sabbath or a personal one. And what I mean by that is, it might be that the whole nation does this every 7 years, or it might be that individually each person does this with their own fields. So if you have fields that have been planted at different times, the 7th year might be different for your barley field than it is for your wheat field. Or if you took possession of your land a year later than somebody else, your 7th year might be different from theirs. But whatever the case, you can see how the Lord is expanding the application of the Sabbath day now in ways that would have a significant impact on the people. A weekly Sabbath day requires you to trust the Lord to provide for you for how long? one day, basically, right? You put down your work for one day and you trust the Lord to provide for you. But if you're gonna take an entire year off, you have to trust the Lord to provide for what you would normally have from that field. Even if you rotate the schedule for your fields, it's still not a small thing to let an entire field go fallow for a year when you depend on the land to provide your food. So every 7 years, you have to intentionally trust the Lord to provide what you need. Now, that could feel risky.
Especially if you're from Wyoming.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Is it risky?
Oh, I don't know, I got pumpkins or something coming up all over my garden this year.
They gonna
Flower
last,
pots,
are they gonna last into winter time? I'm looking for a year.
they don't care. I hope not.
Sally, what did the farmers do for a year when they weren't working in their fields?
Well, that's a good question. I'm gonna come back to that in just a second when we get to the Jubilee year. It's interesting to think about. Come back to that, yeah.
Well, it's hard for me to visualize farms in the desert.
They're not gonna be in the desert, they're gonna be in the land of
Well, they're
Canaan.
going to Canaan,
Right,
so this is for when they go to Canaan,
That's
it's not
right.
when they're.
this isn't for their wilderness wandering, this is for the time that
Okay,
they're in Canaan.
okay.
What, can you tell me about Canaan, not just geographically, but topography? What's their agriculture, I mean, what is their seasons like?
So there's a handout that I gave you that has the agricultural, like the times that things are harvested. So the rain typically starts to come in late fall and winter, and then the harvests start usually in April. So you have grain harvests, and then you have, I don't know, flax and
When did you
olives
give us
and
that?
pomegranates and, when we did the festivals. So if you can't find it, let me know at the
Okay.
end, and I'll make sure that you get it. But there was a chart, it was a big chart that had all the different festivals and the months that they occur in. And on the back of that chart, there was an agricultural, yeah, so Sherry's
Pinkish purple.
holding it up
Yeah.
over there.
Here you go.
And the title
Oh,
of it
okay.
is The Hebrew Calendar Compared to the Gregorian.
Yeah, and then on the back side is
The
the
back side,
agricultural.
yeah.
Okay, so it's a little bit lighter,
Yeah,
the lighter.
And have harvest times
Yes.
on the back side.
right. Yep. So the beginning of the agricultural year would have been like late October, November, but your first harvest would have come in like,
So if you're saying though that perhaps depending on the field, they might give like you said, a barley field, the 7th year Sabbath, but the wheat field might be on a different schedule.
it's possible.
Possible.
Mhm.
So they might be tending other crops during.
Right. Now, when we get to the year of Jubilee in just a minute,
Yeah.
the whole nation takes the
The
whole
whole
year
year.
off from everything. Is that risky?
Yeah. That's trust, big trust.
So it's risky unless you know the character of your God. If you know the character of your God, it's not, is it? Who's in control of the land?
It still is.
Tell me why.
Well, as one who has not lived from paycheck to paycheck, but from painting sale to painting sale, you know, we've had to really keep our eyes on Jesus and remember that he's our provider. It's not the painting sale or the paycheck or, you know,
Yes.
yeah.
Is it safer to trust yourself, or is it safer to trust the Lord?
Safer to trust your bank account.
It feels safer, but it's not, right?
Correct.
It feels safer when you're the one who's in control, but actually, you're never the one who's in control. The
No,
Lord is the one
right.
who's in control. And so I imagine anybody who comes up to this, even if you're rotating the crops, when you come up to a year when you're going to make the choice to let that field lie fallow,
Yeah.
you have to make the choice to trust the Lord. It's going to be risky. But if it feels like, I can't do that, what do? You go back and remember who your God is. If he can pour out bread in the wilderness for people to eat, can he not provide enough for you to be able to to actually do what he commands you to do to rest during this year? He can, but you're gonna have to make that choice when you let your fields lie fallow, that you're gonna trust him over yourself.
Especially when there are thousands of them, when you think of the numbers of them.
Well, and there were poor people, because they're gonna come upon them.
Yes, yeah. And then think about, I mean, if the only way for you to get real substantial rest is to exercise that kind of trust in God, isn't it? Because if you rest, but you're always hedging your bets, you're like, okay, I'm gonna rest a little bit, but I don't fully trust God to take care of me, so I'll just budget here and there. You're never actually gonna get the rest that God wants for his people, because substantial, real rest comes from banking everything on the Lord and being willing to trust him for it.
So how about over in verse 20? But you might ask, what will we eat during the 7th year, since we are not allowed to plant or harvest crops that year? I mean, his answer is so
Yeah.
gentle. Be assured that I will send my blessing for you in the 6th year.
Yes.
So if you are doing barley one year, and, well, that's a lot to. In the 6th year, you get your blessing, so the land will produce a crop large enough for 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That's really cool.
yes. We're gonna come back to that in just a second.
So
'Cause it's-
if they're not
huge.
planting, will they be harvesting any seeds, or they just do absolutely nothing?
Well, you would assume that they would have seeds from the year before. Maybe you can go out and take seeds for the next year's harvest. But you're not going out with a sickle or whatever and harvesting like you normally would. You're just going out and taking from the fields whatever you need to.
So is it just harvesting, or is it
It's planting too.
planting too?
The farming stops. That's basically what he's saying, is the farm work stops.
So what did they do for that whole year?
Well, hold on. Now, let me ask you this.
Verse by verse.
What do you think about a God who commands his people to do that?
That's pretty incredible.
What's incredible about it?
I mean, gee whiz. Not having to work and not having to worry about where your sustenance is coming from, not have to worry about, I mean, that's huge.
Isn't he an amazing God?
He is an
To want
amazing
that
God,
for you?
yes.
And you won't have it unless he tells you, do this, and then trust me. When he comes through, then you're gonna find out where your rest really is. Yeah, what an amazing God he is that he tells his people to do this. And would this not be noticed by their neighbors?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, like the pagan, I mean like the neighbors around them, the pagan nations, when I say their neighbors. Letting the land rest, it would be a bold proclamation of faith that they believe the Lord will take care of them.
No, they would say, are those people crazy?
Well, we're gonna come back to that too in a minute. Okay, now let's get on to the seventh. So those are the instructions for the 7-year Sabbath. Now what are the instructions he gives in verses 8 to 12?
Well, you count 7 times 7,
Mm-hmm.
7 Sabbaths
Right?
times 7 years, and you get 49.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a trumpet sound everywhere on the 10th day
Mm-hmm.
of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement.
Yep.
And it says, consecrate in verse 10 the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land
Yes.
to all its inhabitants.
Whew, okay. Now, whether or not that Sabbath year before is national or individual, this one is national. The 7th Sabbath year is a national Sabbath. So the entire nation stops. They count off 7 sevens. Why 7 sevens?
Because it's completion.
Yeah, it's complete completion, right? It's symbolic of a complete completion. And then on the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement is when it starts. Why do you think the Lord would start this year on the Day of Atonement?
Something to do with offerings? Or?
No, it has to do with the not resurrection, the crucifixion.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. How is it that you and God maintain this covenant relationship together? Because he's provided atonement for you.
Yes.
And the freedom, the rest that's proclaimed is a result of the atonement. So it's appropriate that this year of rest starts, not just any day. It's not just any Tuesday afternoon. It's on the Day of Atonement. You get atonement, the purification of the people's sin, the ongoing fellowship between the Lord and his people, and on that day, every 50 years, then the trumpet gets sounded and liberty gets proclaimed throughout the entire nation. So, how appropriate to start it on the Day of Atonement, when the dwelling place of the Lord has been purified and the sins of the people have been sent away into the wilderness. Now, the text calls this a Jubilee year, and that's like calling it a trumpet year. And the reason I say that is because the English word Jubilee is related to the Hebrew word that refers to an animal's horn that's made into a trumpet. So that kind of horn would probably have been used as the trumpet that starts this year. So it's the trumpet year. And what's different about this year, why is there liberty proclaimed throughout the land? Because in this year, any land that's been sold returns to its original owner. Any person who's had to sell themselves into service returns home to their family. Why would people do that? Why would they sell either themselves or their land? Because of poverty or debt. So the implication is all the debts get wiped out and everybody gets a fresh start. And, well, we'll come back to that in just a minute. But just like with the Sabbath year, this is a year when the people are not to do any farm work, but to eat directly from whatever the fields produce for themselves. And this is the whole nation. Can you imagine? What would it be like if the entire nation took a year off of work?
Well, you wouldn't go in the grocery store, you wouldn't be going to this, and you would, I mean, I'm just thinking of today, you won't, all these things that you have to go. Huh?
The pagans have taken a year off.
Oh, go to the pagan stores? Or the pagan out, fast food places?
Good thing we don't live under law. That would be the year that the pagans are going to really notice, though.
It is, because here's the thing. If God does what he says he's going to do, like we'll get to in a minute in verse 20, if you have all these neighbors who are watching the Israelites, and they proclaim a year when they're not going to do any farm work, okay, so to start off with, all the neighbors are going to be like, you're insane, right? You're just asking for famine. Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. They're all going to starve to death. Okay, but if the Lord does what he says he's going to do, 6 months into that, they're going to have plenty of food. How long do you think it would take before some of those pagans start to look around and think, you know what, I'd rather have their God than mine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done with this Baal nonsense. I want that God for my God. I want the God who commands his people to rest and then provides, just pours out blessing on them. Not because they bribe him with their stuff, but because he's in covenant relationship
Well,
with them.
there also must be a year of fellowship with each other, and I would think that the pagans, they could see this and go, wow.
Mhm. Well, yeah. Okay, so now back to the question you asked, Jane. If the whole nation takes a year off, what do you do for a year?
It's just a year off of farming though.
Right. So you can still do other stuff.
So they're still shepherding their sheep and
Mhm.
goats and doing pottery and
Right.
weaving and,
Mhm.
I mean, business goes on, they're just not farming.
Right. But the farming takes up an enormous amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So now you've got more time. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, I thought, to me, that the fellowship had to just increase exponentially.
Mhm.
Because it's like, well, I can't do that right now because I gotta do this.
Right.
The priorities had to shift
Right.
major.
So for one thing, you can catch up on all the work you put off, right? All your weaving and your sewing and all that kind of stuff. You can catch up on all that. If your house needs to be fixed, you can fix your house, like all that kind of thing. But then at some point, you're going to have time, and what do you do with it? You hang around with other people, don't you?
Well, imagine too that other people would, that you need your house fixed, let's all go help you, and you think just that
You would have
alone
time to sit with your neighbors. You would have time to go eat with people. You would
and
have
help each other.
time to help each other. You'd have time to fix stuff that needs to be fixed and to do work that hasn't gotten done and to do it together, wouldn't you?
And do funding.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it more fun isn't there something compelling even about doing those things together? It's one thing for you to rest, but if you and all the people in your town are resting, well, then you can all rest together. You can have a barbecue together. You can fix somebody's house together. There's a sense in which rest, I think, is intended to help fellowship.
So when can we start doing this?
You have your barn raising.
That's a good idea, have your barn raising. Finish your quilt. Right.
Ooh, I mean,
Yeah, what will we do?
we trust the Lord.
Okay. Come back to that too. Okay, now, let's look at the specifics about how to deal with property that's bought and sold. Because that's a big part of the year of Jubilee, is the redemption of the land. So, in the verses that come next, the Lord's going to expand on the instructions about redemption. So, in verses 13 to 17, because the land belongs to the Lord and because he's giving it to his people as an inheritance, they are not allowed to sell it unless financial difficulties mean they have no choice. Possession of the land is hugely important in order for the people to be able to support themselves, and keeping the land in their family ensures provision for future generations. The Lord will not allow the land to be bought up by a handful of rich people who then establish a system where they control everybody else. I mean, there are times that's happened in history. That happened in Europe, it happened in Britain, it's happened in other places where you get a handful of people who own all the land and everybody else works for them. There's a kind of economic oppression that comes with that that's not so different from slavery, and the Lord will not allow that. So, that kind of thing actually did happen later in Israel's history, according to Isaiah 5. Isaiah mentions that, and the Lord punished the people who did it, because he never intended for the land to be controlled by a handful of people. And just as a side note, all of this stands in the background of the story of King Ahab and Naboth's vineyard. So when King Ahab decides he wants to buy the vineyard of Naboth, it was wrong for him to even ask. The law made it clear he should not have been doing that. Because here, what's the king doing? He doesn't need the land, he just wants it for himself. And it's really interesting when he offers to buy it, the response of Naboth is not, you know what, I don't feel like it. Or I just like this vineyard. No. The response of Naboth is, the Lord forbid that I would sell to you the inheritance of my fathers. Naboth knows the law. And he's not about to sell his property to the king, and the king shouldn't be asking. But you know how the story turns out, because he's married to a Baal-worshipping queen, and she comes along and says to him, it's okay, I read this the other day, it was really shocking. She says to Ahab, I will give you the land. Who does she think she is? To give the land of the Lord to the king. But that's what she presumes to do. And, well, she came to a sticky end and fully deserved it. Okay, now, back to the year of Jubilee. So, in 13 to 17, by establishing the year of Jubilee, when everyone returns to their original property, the Lord establishes some parameters around the buying and selling of land. So in Israel, there's not this typical real estate market where the land increases in value the longer you have it. When the land is bought or sold in Israel, it's not technically the land that's changing hands, it's the crops that it would produce. So the price of the land is based on the yearly crops that it would produce up until the year of Jubilee. So say you have a field that would produce $1,000 worth of crops in a year. If the year of Jubilee is 20 years away, the price of the field would be $20,000. Maybe minus the Sabbath years, perhaps. But if the year of Jubilee is only 5 years away, then the price would be $5,000, because you're paying for the number of crops, the amount of crops you'll get until that year comes. Now, you notice that in verses 14 and 17, the Lord commands his people not to take advantage of each other. That's important, because if someone's selling their land, it means they are in serious financial difficulties, and it could be really tempting to take advantage of someone if you've got them over a barrel. But the Lord says, don't be doing that. What are they to do instead?
Fear him.
Fear him. That's an interesting way to put it. Don't take advantage of your fellow Israelites, but fear the Lord instead. If you're taking advantage of the poor, the assumption underneath that is nobody's going to hold you accountable. But the Lord will hold people accountable for doing that. So he says, don't even think about treating the poor that way, because the Lord knows what they're doing. And the Lord, because he'll hold them accountable, they should act in fear of him. And then he adds, He is the Lord their God. Okay, if Chemosh were their God or Molech were their God, it would be different. But if the Lord is their God, this is how they're to treat the other Israelites.
So, do you know anything about the current times?
I don't.
I just wonder, what would have brought about the change, if there was a change,
Yeah, I don't know.
you know?
You should Google it and tell us next week. Because now I'm interested, yeah.
But
But I
if they
don't know.
don't, but if they don't believe in the law and they don't believe in God, I mean, what do they care?
Well, yeah, I mean, they might believe in God, but it's a pretty secular state now. So I would guess that they just have a typical real estate market like, but I don't know when it would have changed.
I kind of think not.
Then, yeah, but look it up, that's, or maybe it's different, like in a Hasidic community or an Orthodox community,
Right.
than it would be just in a secular community, but I don't know for
I
sure.
don't know how that could be either.
Yeah, I don't either, I
Okay.
don't.
I will look at it.
Okay, now, if after hearing all those commands regarding your Jubilee, you're thinking, what are people gonna eat? We talked about that before. I mean, it might be natural to feel a bit apprehensive when you hear this, and it's not just what you'll eat, but if the whole nation if you give back all the land to who it originally belonged to, if all of the slaves go free, if everyone goes back to their family, there's gonna be some major reordering of things in the nation, things that might even leave you vulnerable. It might feel like there's a serious risk to your food security, your financial security, maybe even your national security. What does the Lord tell the people in 18 to 22?
I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. So that means that they still have food from the previous years before Jubilee, before this
Right.
year of the,
Mhm.
that they're still living on that,
Right.
right?
That's a lot of food, because you need food for that year, food for the Jubilee year, and then food for the next year,
For the next year.
when you start planting. And
Oh,
the Lord
that's-
says, I'll take care of it.
Okay,
Yeah, that's why it's 3 years worth of food.
okay.
So do you remember how when the people went through the wilderness and the Lord provided manna, how every 6th day he would give them enough for the 7th day?
Mhm.
He's doing the same thing in principle here, but now it's on a much bigger scale. He's going to give them enough for the time of rest ahead of time so that they won't lack for anything. And he starts off by saying too, he will give them safety. That's important because if they get attacked by their enemies, all of that makes a big difference in how the economy works. He's going to give them safety as well as just this massive provision of food. There's going to be so much food that when they finally begin planting again the next year, they're still going to be eating that old crop until the new crop comes in.
So
Wow.
Now we know what the women were doing, they were canning.
That's right. They're putting things in their freezer.
Yeah.
That's right. If they trust him and they honor him and they take him up on the command to rest, they will experience the grace that comes with that rest when he blesses them, protects them, and provides for them. Think how much blessing they're going to miss out on if they don't trust him. How much blessing they won't see if they just decide to hedge their bets. But if they will bank everything on him, it's going to be amazing. And what's really interesting here is that the picture that emerges kind of takes you back to the Garden of Eden. Because here are the people living securely in God's land, having all their needs met, walking in obedient fellowship with him. That's always been the Lord's intent for humanity. And now Israel has the privilege of showing to the nations this vision of what it would look like to return to Eden. It's like they're inviting the nations around them to come and experience it, to say, I mean, I could imagine too, if you were an evangelist in the nation of Israel, and you had a pagan neighbor at some point, halfway through the year of Jubilee, wouldn't you want to be like, hey, come see how things are with us, Why don't you come find out who our God is? Like, we've had a year, because the Lord gave us how much food, so we could stop and rest. Come and meet our God, and, join up with us, have the experience of this God instead of the false God you worship. Okay, now,
So-
yeah. mhm.
So what about in those 3 years with the sacrifices? Do they still come and give their sacrifices and they still have those festivals and all that stuff during those 3 years?
Yes, but I assume the harvest festival would look different.
The first fruits festival?
Yeah, so you're still gonna do Passover and unleavened bread and all that kind of thing, but first fruits is gonna be different because you're not harvesting.
You know, obviously.
Right. Now, I say that, but actually, one of the big questions that all the commentators raise is, did Israel ever actually do this? Like, if they were to do it every 50 years, you would assume most people would experience a year of Jubilee at least once in their lifetime. But there's no indication anywhere in the Old Testament that they ever actually did it. That doesn't mean they didn't. They might have. But it's never recorded anywhere in the Old Testament that they actually did the year of Jubilee.
Because that's my, because I'm thinking, they're still human. And I would think human nature that some are doing it to the max, some are saying, I'll give it my best shot
Yep.
and not worry. So as a peer, and especially based on what you just said, like with the peer pressure on, look, you gotta do this or we're all gonna be in trouble. And, or there will be maybe you see the blessings of the one that are doing it earnestly and, but, so that's an interesting step.
Maybe it happened during the time of Joshua, I don't know, but when you read the book of Judges, I can't imagine they did it during the time of Judges because everyone's doing whatever they want.
You know, to be honest, I keep putting myself in their situation. I think, wow, okay, the 6th year, we gotta be working. We gotta be putting this stuff away because the 7th year, you know, I mean, because that human.
And then who are you trusting?
I'm trusting myself.
That's right.
Exactly, but did they do that? Is there anything in there that, I mean,
I'm
that's
sure
just
it's
my
always a
tendency to
temptation.
wanna, okay, well, God's blessed this 6th year, so now I need to be canning and freezing and getting all this stuff done because next year there's gonna be nothing.
Well, do you remember when the people were in the wilderness and God told them not to go out on the 7th day and gather? Do you remember what happened to the people who did? They gathered it, but it went bad, right?
Yeah.
Because it was not the Lord's purpose that they would, store it or save it up or whatever, except for that one. Or even people who tried to save it up during the week.
So does
They
that
could
one
do that on the
apply to this?
6th day, but they couldn't do it, the other 5 days, or the manna would go bad.
So would that apply to the 6th year then, do you think?
He never says that, but I think that God's getting at that tendency that we have to say, I can't really trust God to provide what I need.
Well, maybe we think
So I
also
better
that
hedge my
maybe
bets.
it's not just trusting, but think, okay, well, God's given me this stuff, I need to get it done.
Well,
So
and
what's the difference?
that's true in a lot of circumstances, but what did the Lord specifically tell them for this year? That He's going to pour out so much provision. Not only in the years that will come, but He will give them enough food to eat from the fields as well. So there are times when storing stuff up is a good idea, like with Joseph, right? There are times when, you see hard stuff coming and you're thinking, okay, I need to be prepared and God's blessed me, and it's a good thing to store things up and look ahead and think, okay, I'm going to take what God's given me and I'm going to use it the best way I know how. But this is the kind of thing where God is not, His intent is not to double the work in the 6th year. His intent is for you to trust Him to provide for you. To realize the land is His, the provision is His, and He can pour it out on you without you stockpiling ahead of time.
And again, it's the farming, so it's wheat and barley
Right.
and grapes for wine.
That's right.
It's not figs and pomegranates because there's nowhere to store those.
I don't think so.
Well, and those grow, things that grow on trees are gonna continue to grow on trees. You're not gonna.
So you don't have to worry about canning it,
Right.
they just go get what they want from the meal.
Right.
Fermenting.
Yep. Okay,
Wow.
let's keep going. So, in verse 23, the Lord states explicitly, the land belongs to Him, and His people are resident guests there. And because of that, the land must not be sold permanently. It can be sold temporarily, and the reason for doing that would have been debt or poverty. But the people must provide for redemption of the land so that it doesn't ever become the permanent possession of somebody else. Okay, now, What would that look like in practice? That's what's going to be described in the laws that are laid down in the sections that follow. So what we're going to see here is that the law is going to address 3 different levels of poverty. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have somebody whose crop fails and they don't have any savings and they have to borrow money in order to buy seed to plant the following year. If that crop fails too, they might have to sell some of their land to cover their debts and borrow more money for seed. If that crop fails, then they might have to sell the remaining land. And if they still have significant debt, then they might have to sell themselves. There's 3 levels of poverty addressed here. A financial setback in verses 25 to 28, a more serious financial problem in 35 to 38, and then the worst kind of poverty in verses 39 to 43.
Is that in our notes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now let's just look at the first scenario, which is in verses 25 to 28. So say an Israelite has a serious financial setback, and that could happen for all kinds of reasons, crop failure, being swindled, having health problems, whatever. So they sell a portion of their property in order to provide for themselves. In that case, their nearest relative, a brother, an uncle, cousin, is to come and buy back the property on their behalf. Now, what if there's no relative who can do that? Well, if at some point in the future they get back on their feet, they can come and buy back their land. So remember the pricing for a piece of land. If it costs, well, say again, taking our previous case, if you have a piece of land that produces $1,000 worth of crops every year, the Jubilee is 20 years away, the property is then sold for $20,000. 2 years later, the person gets on their feet, they come back and they want to buy it back. Now the price is $18,000. It doesn't go up, it goes down, because the original price then, you subtract from it 2 years worth of crops. Now, what if the person never acquires enough money to buy the land back? What happens?
The year of Jubilee.
Yep, it gets returned to them. Or there was a writer I read who said it like this. He said, if the person can never get their land back, the Lord himself steps in and acts as their redeemer through the means of his law. So the Lord has already established redemption for the land every 50 years for people who can't do it. So you always get your land back. It might be a while, but you get it back. Okay, now verses 29 and 30 to 31, just insert a sort of extra bit here. We've been talking about fields, but what about houses? Well, it depends on whether or not the house is in a city or whether it's on land where there's fields or open country. So a house in a city can be redeemed for up to a year after it's sold, but then it becomes the permanent property of the buyer and his descendants. But a house in a village that's situated in open country is treated the same way as a field. It can be redeemed anytime and it's returned to the original owner in the year of Jubilee. Now, why is there a difference? Because houses in rural areas are directly tied to the farmland, which is how the people support themselves. A house in the city is not tied to the farmland, and so it's not a vital part of their inheritance. Their descendants don't need it to support themselves, and that's what makes the difference.
So the houses in the city belong to the merchants. So, kicking back to one of our other conversations about where are they going to obtain goods, you know, if they have brothers and sisters in the city who have some kind of goods that they're selling, I don't know, probably, maybe, perhaps not food. Well, perhaps it is food, pomegranates and dates.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any importation of crops? Do you know?
There is later in Israel's history, where they're trading with the nations around them, but I don't know how soon that starts. Now, there's also another situation that's mentioned in 32 to 34, and that's the situation of the Levites. Now, the Levites, they're a special circumstance because of the unique position they hold in Israel. As a tribe, because they've been set apart for the Lord, they don't get the same inheritance as all the other tribes. The Levites were not given any land. They were given 48, and by that I mean farmland. They were given 48 cities throughout Israel and the pasture that immediately surrounds them so they could have animals. If the Levites had been allowed to sell off their houses with no guarantee of redemption in the year of Jubilee, they could have found themselves homeless with nothing. So the purpose of the laws in verses 32 to 34 is to prevent that from happening.
That
To-
makes sense.
48, which are mentioned in Numbers 35 and Joshua 21.
But don't they depend a lot on the other people
Yes,
anyway?
They depend entirely, don't they?
yeah, which is why they don't have farmland. They don't farm. I mean, you might have a garden or something, but they don't farm because they are full-time workers at the tabernacle.
Right.
So it's the people's farm, their crops that support the priests, yes.
So when God is providing for the farmers, is 3 years worth of provision, there's a portion of that that goes to the Levites.
That's right. So they're provided for as well, that's right. And then the pasture land too, he says, around the towns must not be sold, because it doesn't belong to the individuals, it belongs to the people of the town. The Levites, they need it for grazing their animals, and so it can't ever become the permanent property of someone else. Okay, now, after pausing just to address houses and Levites, now in verses 35 to 38, we come back to this issue of poverty, now with the second scenario, where an Israelite experiences a more serious financial setback than what we saw in 25 to 28. So in this scenario, it's already taken for granted the person has lost their land, and now they've become poor and they're unable to support themselves. In that case, he says the people are to be generous to them as they would be to a foreigner or a stranger who's resident in Israel or a hired worker. Biblical law is really insistent that foreigners be treated well. If the family steps in to help in this way, then the person who sold his land will hopefully avoid having to sell himself into slavery, which is what's coming next. I think sometimes when I read this, I thought, why do you have to tell people to help their family members? I think sometimes it's easier to say no to a family member, especially if they've squandered some things, and a little easier to say, yes to a stranger who you don't know their circumstances. I don't know. But here's the Lord saying, whatever generosity you're commanded to extend to the poor and the foreigners around you, extend that to a fellow Israelite too. And if someone loans the person money or sells them food, they're not to charge interest on the loan. They're not to sell food for profit. Instead, they are to fear the Lord their God. That's really interesting. Why would you be charging interest on a loan to someone who's poor?
It happens all the time.
You forget what you're never gonna get back.
Well, you're making money off of someone who
Right.
can't afford it, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a reason we call them loan sharks, right? You're devouring people. You're just taking advantage of people who are over a barrel, and they are desperate. And the Lord says, don't be doing that. Don't be doing that to the other Israelites. Don't use their poverty as an opportunity for you to make money. Don't profit off of their misfortune. Help them instead. And he doesn't just say help them, he says fear the Lord. Because if you're taking advantage of the poor, you're assuming they can't hold you accountable, but the Lord can. So fear the Lord in the way that you treat them.
What if they're poor just because they're lazy and people know that?
Well,
There are scriptures. to
yeah, there
deal
are
with that.
scriptures that read Proverbs.
Yeah.
Now, did you notice that twice in these verses the Lord mentions that the purpose in doing this is so the person can continue to live within the community? The alternative, if the other Israelites won't help them, the alternative would be to leave and go somewhere else to look for work or help, which, by the way, is what happens in the book of Ruth. Why does Naomi's family leave? The implication is nobody's helping them. So where do they end up? They end up in Moab, right? Because they don't have enough to eat if they stay in Israel. It's important to the Lord that the unity of the nation is not destroyed by poverty. That's something we talked a bit about last week too, but it shows up in the book of Nehemiah. When poverty starts to really divide the nation, they're having a hard time rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem because the disparity between the rich and the poor in Israel makes it just impossible. So the Lord he does not want poverty to divide the nation that way. And then what else does he add in verse 38?
I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan, to be your God.
Why do you think he threw in a reference to Egypt right there?
Remind us.
Remind them that they had been in slavery.
That's right. He saved them out of oppression in Egypt. Gave them all these good things in Canaan, and he did all of that in order to be their God. So they must not treat each other the way the Egyptians treated them. He didn't free them so they could just end up in bondage again. He freed them so they could be free. So they have to be mindful of God's provision and grace when they interact with other Israelites who are poor. Okay, now verses 39 to 43, now we're looking at a third scenario where an Israelite becomes so poor that he has to sell himself to somebody else. And based on 41, he's selling his family as well. So in this case, I mean, this is somebody who's got nothing. If you have to sell yourself, you really are left without any alternative. So in this case, the one who buys a poor person must not enslave him, but he must treat him as a hired worker or a temporary resident. That means treating his servitude as temporary rather than permanent, paying him wages, taking care of his food and shelter, but also looking after his well-being. So it's important that they treat the Israelites not as slaves, but as they would a hired worker. And when the year of Jubilee comes, I mean, Exodus 21 provides a situation where you have servitude just for a particular period of time. And so you can make an agreement with someone where you have a debt, you serve them until the debt gets paid off, or think about Jacob and Laban. You agree to terms where you're going to serve for a certain period of time in order to get something at the end. What Exodus says is when the debt is paid off or 7 years come, whichever happens first, the person goes free. Now, what's different here is that you have a level of poverty where turning the person free doesn't help them. Because if they're this poor and you turn them out after 7 years, what are they going to do? They don't have any land. They're right back where they started. So this is the kind of level of poverty where they continue in servitude to this other person, either until they get back on their feet or until the year of Jubilee. The benefit of being released in the year of Jubilee is you get your land back. So you get turned loose from your servitude, but now you have a place to go. You have a way to provide for yourself because you get your land back in that year too. And verse 41 says, the whole family has to be freed to return home to their clan and their property. And the Lord adds right here, the Israelites are not to be sold as slaves by their master because they ultimately belong to him. They don't belong to anybody else, they belong to the Lord who delivered them out of slavery in Egypt. Again, he didn't free his people so they could just end up in bondage in their own nation. They're not supposed to be just swapped and sold by their countrymen in order to make a profit. So they are not to enslave one another the way the nations around them do. And when they buy someone who's poor, they must not rule over them ruthlessly the way the Egyptians ruled over them. They are instead to fear the Lord. If you're ruling over someone ruthlessly, you're assuming nobody holds you accountable, but the Lord does. So a poor person might not be able to do anything about their situation, but the Lord can and he will, and so they are to treat their fellow Israelites with respect. Okay, now in verses 44 to 46, it was possible for the Israelites to have permanent slaves, but they had to come from the other nations or from the foreign residents in Israel. So a foreigner could end up being sold to an Israelite because he was poor, or he could sell himself because he was poor, or he could be a prisoner of war who became enslaved as an alternative to execution. So at a time when incarceration was rare, which it was in the ancient Near East, slavery was a practical way to keep your enemies in check. And in Israel, by the way, even foreign slaves had rights, because that gets mentioned in Exodus 21. So foreigners, they have rights, but they can be sold, bequeathed, inherited, and they are not set free in the year of Jubilee. That's different from the Israelites who belong to the Lord. So in a certain sense, you can't take possession of someone who already belongs to someone else. The Israelites already belong to someone else. They belong to the Lord. And so there's a distinction here, and it's a theological distinction that underlies all of this. The Jubilee year is a guarantee that no Israelite is going to be reduced to slave status again because the Lord brought them out of slavery for them to be free. So there's this great redemption that God provides for his people, so that they continue to be his God, they continue to be his people, and he continues to be their God. Redemption is the particular privilege of the people who belong to the Lord. There's a distinction right here that matters, that the covenant people experience redemption in a way that the people outside of the covenant do not. Well, let's keep going with that. So, 47 to 55. What if an Israelite who's poor sells himself to a resident foreigner who's rich? Well, he can still be redeemed. Regardless of who owns him, he can be redeemed, whether it's by a relative who buys him back, or if he recovers financially, he can redeem himself. Redemption is the privilege of God's people. Now, that doesn't mean the foreigner who bought him gets taken advantage of, because the instructions say, just like with the land, the person who bought him has to be compensated based on the number of years until the year of Jubilee, because in the year of Jubilee, he goes free. But the owner doesn't set the redemption price, the Lord does, and he establishes a system based on the price for a yearly hired worker. So, a foreigner has to treat an Israelite not like a slave, but like a hired hand. They cannot rule over them ruthlessly. And if they don't get redeemed, they and their family will be released as usual in the year of Jubilee. So ultimately, the Israelites belong to the Lord, not to a foreigner and not to anybody else, because they are his servants who he brought out of Egypt. They cannot be enslaved by anyone else. Now, the years of Sabbath and Jubilee they're interesting because they're a physical illustration of a spiritual reality. Debt and slavery were commonplace, and the Lord uses them right here as metaphors for something bigger. The reason I say that is because there's a common grace that the Lord extends to everybody, but there's a particular grace that he extends only to his people. And one of the particular graces that are given to his people is the grace of redemption. Who gets redeemed? I mean, when you think about this in spiritual terms, does everybody get redeemed? Who gets redeemed?
He's chosen.
That's right, the people who belong to him. So there's a picture in this of redemption being the privilege of God's people, not just physically here, but spiritually in what's coming later. Okay, now, the time's getting on, but we are going to stop and read from Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, verses 16 to 21.
Versus what?
16 to 21. So in the context, Jesus is, he's traveling around Galilee and preaching. And in chapter 4:16 it says, he went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. And he stood up to read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him, and he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Now, in verse 19, when he says, he quotes that bit from Isaiah, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's a phrase that's used in the Old Testament to refer to the year of Jubilee. So Jesus says, the year of Jubilee, it's here because I'm here. Why would he say that? What do you think he means by that?
He is our Jubilee.
Okay, tell me what you mean by that.
Well, he's redeemed us. He only Jesus can offer full redemption, and we're slaves to our sin. And basically what this whole chapter 25 is a picture of that.
Yeah, that's right. So when Jesus shows up, it's the ultimate Jubilee. It's not a release from your farm work. It's a release from the stuff that really matters, which is sin and death, right? Jesus is the one who pays our debt and redeems our life and rescues us from our poverty and breaks us free from captivity. He's the one who gives us rest and restoration. The year of Jubilee, it looks back to how things were in Eden, and it looks forward to how things will be in the new heavens and the new earth, precisely because of what Jesus does in the gospel.
And then after he said this, they get, they're just amazed at it, and then they get furious. Because,
Yeah,
I just heard, now, I didn't read this before, because I didn't know we were reading it, I didn't have the notes, but I just heard this. I don't know if it was on the radio, or if did Scott just, it must have been, that was really interesting, that was something that he was bringing out.
and if you think about Jesus as bringing the ultimate Jubilee, how appropriate and significant is it then that the year of Jubilee starts on the Day of Atonement? What is it that secures our freedom? It's the atonement through the resurrection, through the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, right? All that, everything that's pictured in the scapegoat and the purification, everything on the Day of Atonement that points ahead to Christ, our Jubilee happens, our redemption happens because of what Christ accomplishes for our atonement. So ultimate redemption and liberation are the particular privilege of those who belong to the Lord, whose faith is in Jesus, whose sins have been atoned for. There is no redemption, no rescue, no freedom outside of belonging to the Lord. But when you belong to the Lord, how much freedom do you get? How much rest do you get? You get the ultimate rest, which isn't about a 9-to-5 job. It's about being free from everything that would oppress you eternally, because you get loose of sin. All right, I'm going to stop talking. Are there comments? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of cool that verse 10 in the chapter that we're in, 25, is on the Liberty Bell.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
On what?
On the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia.
Oh,
Where did it remind us?
Well, the verse,
Yeah.
set this year apart as holy, a time to proclaim freedom throughout the land for all who live there. It continues on to say, it will be a jubilee year for you when each of you may return to the land that belonged to your ancestors and return to your own clan. But I did a little bit of reading about it. It's mainly because of that proclaim freedom.
So the first part of that verse is on our Liberty Bell.
Well, the whole, what they have is Leviticus 25:10. They didn't, I don't remember exactly how much of the verse they actually wrote out.
Oh,
I think they do write it out, just that mine is new, living, so I don't know exactly how's that worded in, how's that worded?
New King James says, "You shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants."
Yeah, it's all about proclaiming liberty on the Liberty Bell.
It's probably the last half of that verse.
And then, I mean, they would be definitely King James that were.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought that was kind of fun little.
yeah, interesting, thank you.
Anything else? Any other comments?
I Googled the year of Jubilee apply, how does the year of Jubilee apply today? And the concept of the year of Jubilee, traditionally observed every 50 years in the Old Testament, finds relevance today through principles of forgiveness, justice, and restoration. While the specific agricultural and land-based practices are not directly applicable, the underlying themes of debt relief, wealth redistribution, and social justice resonate with modern concerns. Modern interpretations focus on applying these principles to contemporary issues like economic inequity, debt forgiveness, and social justice initiatives. I assume that's the paragraph, the article starts out, Israel is eagerly preparing to welcome Catholic pilgrims from around the globe for the Jubilee year of 2025, a time of profound spiritual renewal. This sacred year, rooted in both biblical and Catholic traditions. That's interesting. Both biblical and Catholic traditions offers an unparalleled opportunity to explore the Holy Land where faith, history, and culture converge.
All of that's very interesting, but Jesus seems to be missing. All right, we will stop there.
Cynthia texted me this morning to say that they did not meet